my lacto-fermented dill pickles, if you watched that video, have been finished for about a week now, and I love them. They're delicious. They've been in the refrigerator, and even without the boiled stone and the plate, they don't float anymore. They're down below the surface. And I'm about to make another batch, only this time I've bought a thing called the Picklemeister, which I'll show you in a minute. Glass jar, and it makes the process a bit easier. I'll explain that in a minute as well, but I want to take one of these out and show you what they look like. Well, as I think I said on the previous video, when I was making these, I cut the larger cucumbers into quarters and spears, and the smaller ones I left whole. That's one of each, and I've sliced the smaller one to show you what it looks like in the center. They're very good. They have a nice dill flavor, and because of the amount of garlic that was in this recipe, I also have a good garlic flavor, but they're nice and crisp and crunchy, and I really like them. Well, this is the Picklemeister, and the concept here is it isn't necessary to keep checking during the fermentation process to make sure there isn't any mold or anything building up, because they will be working completely under the liquid and in an atmosphere free of air where the mold or yeast spores could come from. That's an airlock on top, so that gases that are inside coming out of the fermentation process can escape, but nothing can get down inside the jar. So in theory it makes the process a lot simpler. I'm about to set up a batch today, and 4 or 5 days from now I guess I'll be able to compare and see if they are as good as the previous batch that I made. I went up to Fredericton yesterday and went to my favorite farm stand, Harvey's Big Potato, over on the north side, and I bought, I guess it was around 9 pounds of pickling cucumbers, which is a lot more than what I will need to fill the Picklemeister. But the instructions that come with it say you can also use liter canning jars, so the rest of them I'm going to put in individual liter canning jars. The pickles were nice, and the pickling cucumbers were nice and fresh, but I still put them in my canner full of water for overnight, just in the event that they might have lost some moisture. This way they take the moisture back in and it makes them crisper. Now I'm about to take them out individually and cut off about 1/4 of an inch off the blossom end, because that's where that enzyme is that will either prevent your pickles from getting crisp or prevent them from staying crisp. So that's the next step in the process here. Well, the ingredients are fairly simple. Once again, I'm going to use grape leaves, although the recipe for this doesn't recommend them. It doesn't say not to use them, it just doesn't mention grape leaves. But I found my last batch of pickles were nice and crisp, and I used grape leaves, so I'm going to continue. And I'm adding 2 tablespoons of mixed pickling spice. The little book that I bought along with the Picklemeister says, feel free to add your own seasonings. Well, I have one batch that's just got garlic and dill in, so I thought I'd add a little different flavor to this one. 5 garlic cloves sliced, and this is the first time that I've used my own freshly harvested garlic, so that's an addition. 2 medium onions sliced, 5 tablespoons of sea salt, 5 or 6 heads or more of fresh dill. And that basically is the ingredients, except of course the cucumbers. And 6 cups rather of fresh water to mix the salt into. Well, I've started loading the Picklemeister. On the bottom I put about half of the garlic, about half of the pickling spice, some of the grapevine leaves, and 2 or 3 heads of the fresh dill. And then I have jammed it full of cucumbers standing on end. And I mean jammed it full. You put as many as you can put in a layer, because once they are in the brine will leach water out of the cucumbers, and so they will shrink slightly, and they will be easy to remove, but you put as many in as possible. I've added a layer of the onions on top of that, and now I'm going to start with a second layer of the pickles. I'll put in some more dill and the rest of the garlic and the rest of the pickling spice. Well, that's all the cucumbers and other ingredients jammed into the bottle. Now I'm going to add the brine. I think that might be just about enough brine. If necessary, it gives you the amount of salt to add to a cup of water to add more, but it seems to be almost right. I may have to add a bit more though now that I think about it. There's another smaller plastic cover that goes down in this upside down, which holds the pickles under the brine during the fermenting process, and I think perhaps I need to add either a few more pickles or a little more brine. Think that over here for a second. Well, I didn't have to add any more brine. I added some more onions to the top and a couple of cucumbers laying horizontal instead of vertical, and then when I put the small plastic cover that fits down inside in there upside down and pushed on it, it filled with liquid and filled up to the surface, which is what it's supposed to do. And now the one with the airlock on it is holding that down so that none of the product in there that's being pickled can be exposed to air. The next process is, I guess, about 5 days of fermentation at room temperature in the dark. So I'm going to clean out a lower cupboard here and put it in a lower cupboard in the kitchen in the dark. Setting inside of a plate which has a lip on it, a half-inch high or so, because this will quite possibly expel some of its liquid. Then you set the plate on top of a thick towel, just in case that overflows. That is part of the process. As the fermentation gas is in there, there's possibility of either coming out around the cover or coming out the airlock on the top. So 5 or 6 days from now, we'll see what these pickles are like. They sure look good in the bottle here. Well, there's my Picklemeister and 4 1-liter jars full of pickles in a cupboard on a towel, ready to catch anything that spills out of them. When I close the door, it's a very dark cupboard. They're supposed to be in the dark, so hopefully I've done everything right. I'm really hoping I'm not awakened in the middle of the night with the sound of exploding pickle jars. But within 5 days or so, I guess the fermentation should finish and I'll have pickles to try. Well, it's now been 4 days since I started the gallon of pickles in the Picklemeister in the 4 1-liter jars. I brought them out of the dark to show you the progress so far. You can see what's happening here. There's gas bubbles. The fermentation is definitely taking place, and that is causing it to expel a little bit of pickle juice, or I think it's blown all of the water that I had in the airlock out and it's replaced it with pickle juice. So it's a good thing it is sitting on a plate. So far the 4 1-liter jars, I haven't seen where anything is really coming out of them yet, but you can also see small bubbles inside, so fermentation is taking place there too. I'll give you a look now at the pickles themselves. I guess you can see that the liquid has got a little more cloudy than it was when I first put it away. It was very clear, and I think the green of the cucumbers themselves has changed a bit. It's not as bright, it's a bit darker. Anyway, this is 4 days, and I'm just really starting to see the first fermentation, so I don't think I'll be ready to put in the refrigerator at 5 days. The instructions are a bit confusing. One place it mentioned 4 or 5 days, and then they should be ready. Another place it says up to 10 days. Well, my last batch that I did in the pickle crock were in the basement where it's cooler, but it took 10 days. So I'm thinking these are going to take 7 or 8 days anyway. This is the 1 liter jar here. You can also see, I think, that the pickling juice inside has got a bit cloudier. Anyway, I have fermentation, so I guess everything is working. Quite excited to hear this thing bubbling away here. I just want to clarify something that I said about the instructions being sort of ambiguous. It wasn't that the instructions that came with the Picklemeister gave 2 different versions. Theirs, I think, insisted on 4 to 5 days, but along with it I also bought a book on making sauerkraut and fermenting various kinds of vegetables, and for this particular pickle recipe it said up to 10 days, so that's where the discrepancy came in. Anyway, I think the thing to do is to follow your own instincts when you're making these things. Once the fermentation is stopped, it's stopped. Not to go, I wouldn't think, beyond 10 days. I think you probably run into danger of spoilage then. It's now been 9 days, and I'm declaring an end, I guess. 2 days ago I opened one of the small jars and had a pickle out of it. It was quite flavorful and very crisp. Yesterday I had another one out of the same jar, and it was even more flavorful and still very crisp. Reminds me of the ad for Lactic pickles on television all the time. Theirs are always so crisp. I wondered what they do to make them crisp. Well, these are just as crisp as Lactic. They're very good. And I had an extremely interesting thing happen when I opened the small jar. So I'm going to open one now and see if the same thing happens so you can get a look at it. It's a lot like opening a bottle of champagne. In theory, they were supposed to expel their gases around the gasket on these jars. But that didn't happen, I guess. That was even a little more effervescent than the one that I did the other day. I think what I'm going to do here is leave the cover off of these for a few minutes before I put them in the refrigerator. But anyway, there was gas under pressure in the small jars. I think I'm pretty lucky that I didn't have exploding pickle jars in the cupboard. Well, I'm going to remove the cover with the airlock. And replace it with the cover that was provided for sealing the jar up when you put it in the refrigerator. And as you can see, the airlock had worked really well. There wasn't any gas stored up in the large jar of pickles. It says that you can expect them, or some people say that they improve with age in the refrigerator once they're cooled and whatever. And I really think that's true if they're going to be anything like the ones that I made with the crock, my last attempt at lacto-fermented pickles here. After a few days in the refrigerator, the flavor was much better. So I think once these are really cooled down, if they stay as nice and crunchy and crisp as they are now, I'm going to be very satisfied with these. I'll keep them in the refrigerator, and eventually I will transfer all the ones in this large jar into mason jars, and they'll also have to be kept refrigerated. But I want to use this Picklemeister jar as soon as my cabbage in the garden is ready to make sauerkraut. I'm sure you've already guessed there'll probably be another video coming there. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little process as much as I did. Talk to you later.